leader of the Republican caucus, Representative Kurt Daudt. Thanks for joining us.
Well, you're welcome.
You're moving from Speaker of the House to House Minority Leader for the upcoming session after an election where you said people were voting against Washington, D.C. What is the Republican message in Minnesota as we enter 2019?
You know, we're going to keep working on the same issues that we have in the past. I know that Minnesotans appreciate the work we've done on reducing taxes and reducing health care costs and health insurance costs, putting more money into roads and bridges. We're going to continue to work on those things. And our colleagues on the other side of the aisle ran their campaigns saying they were going to do those very same things. So if they are and they follow through with that, we'll roll up our sleeves and we'll be right there helping them every step of the way. If they vote to raise healthcare costs or vote to raise taxes on Minnesotans at a time when we have a huge surplus, they're going to expect some pushback, and we're going to be there to hold them accountable.
After your election to continue leading the House Republicans, you told the media, quote, "We're also going to hold Democrats accountable. They made some promises on the campaign trail that we don't think they can keep." Can you expound on that?
They did make promises on the campaign trail, and they said they were going to do things like reduce health care costs, and you know, some of them even said they were going to reduce taxes on Minnesotans. But yet the tune has kind of changed. Now we're talking about, or they're talking about raising taxes when we have a huge surplus. They're talking about raising health care costs. Those are things that are exactly opposite of what they told voters. And if there's one thing that I think people really hate is when you say one thing and do another. So it's fine if you want to go out and tell people you're going to reduce health care costs and you're going to reduce taxes or invest in road and bridge infrastructure. That's great. We'll help you do that. If you lied to them, expect consequences, and I think that's what people would expect of us, and that's what people think is wrong with politics today, when you say one thing and do another.
What was your reaction when you heard the news that 4 Republicans announced a plan to form the so-called new House Republican caucus?
I think I was disappointed more than anything. They did not have conversations with me or with other caucus members before they did that. This is something they worked out with the new majority, the Democrats in the House. So I think I would say I'm disappointed in their actions. I think they are going to have a tougher time wielding influence here at the Capitol. They've got lesser committee assignments. They have no committee assignments on commerce, no committee assignments on bonding. I'm not sure they even have a committee assignment on the tax committee. These are, it's tough if you're not in the room where the decisions are made to wield influence, and it's tough for me to imagine how they think it's going to be a good move for them personally. But it's certainly their right. They have an election certificate. That's what they've chosen to do, and I respect that.
Melissa Hortman is expected to be the new Speaker of the House. What is your relationship like with her, and how well will you be able to work with her this upcoming session?
I think we have a good working relationship. I think she, as somebody who's been through that transition from minority leader to speaker, I did that 4 years ago and served then 4 years as speaker. It's different. I'm not sure it's exactly what she probably expects it's going to be, and it wasn't when I went through that transition. But I think when you become speaker, there's a sense of the institution, and now you're running the state of Minnesota and making decisions that impact all Minnesotans, and I think there's some weight in those decisions, and I think she will learn to appreciate the sense of the weight of those decisions and the sense for maintaining the dignity of our institution in the House of Representatives, and for the part where I can be helpful to her in that, I will. To be respectful, I won't weigh in unless I'm asked.
Tim Walz will be the state's governor when the legislature returns. What is your impression of the new governor, and can your caucus effectively work with him?
I think we can. We have a record of working with everyone. That's been my record in St. Paul. I certainly vehemently disagree with people from time to time, and I do that aggressively sometimes, but I also do it respectfully. I think Minnesotans appreciate a good debate on issues, and we shouldn't diminish the value of the decisions we're making by not debating them. We need to explore all sides of these issues. Governor-elect Walz is a talented politician and someone who has done a great job communicating with Minnesotans. His experience in St. Paul and on the issues that we work with is very, very limited. He hasn't been in St. Paul before, so there's going to be a lot that's new for him. I and Senator Bach are the two most experienced leaders in St. Paul right now. We both find ourselves in the minority, which is an interesting position, but we both know how to operate in the majority and in the minority, and I think we will continue to try to be helpful and moving and shaping public policy as we move forward. So Governor-elect Walz can look at me as someone who can be helpful on issues if he chooses to tap into my experience and my knowledge of how to get things done in St. Paul. If not, I respect that, and I understand that I'm in the minority and he may not need my votes on all but at least the bonding bill. So I look forward to working with him. I have not had a chance to meet with him yet. I know he's been busy with his transition, but hope to do that in the near future. But I think he can count on me as an ally if he chooses.
The recently released budget forecast shows a roughly $1.5 billion surplus for the 2020-21 biennium. What do you make of that number, and how do you think that money should be put to use?
Well, I think that the surplus that we're going to see in the next biennium is important to really look at and learn where it came from. It's because of the great policies that Republicans put in place over the course of the last 4 years that we really have that surplus. And it actually is more than a $1.5 billion surplus. It's actually a $2 billion surplus, but statute put $500 million automatically into our reserves. So our reserves are almost completely full now. At a time when I took over and was elected 8 years ago, the reserves were zero. Zero in the cash flow account, zero in the reserve account. So we've built that back up to where the state's in a very healthy position. But what I mean by we need to learn and respect where that money comes from, it comes from the prosperity that was created by a growing, thriving economy, by the hard work that Minnesotans have done to build that economy. And it's because of some public policy that we put in place by reinvesting back into small businesses and to taxpayers by letting them keep more of their hard-earned income by reducing taxes. And so we've seen a almost unprecedented economic growth in the state of Minnesota. Our unemployment rate is near all-time lows. We're basically in a full employment in the state of Minnesota, but yet we still have some issues that we can work on. We're not lining up our job seekers with the jobs that are available in the best way that I think we can through our public education institutions. So there are things that we can still work on. Some of the things that we shouldn't do, we shouldn't increase taxes at a time when we have a huge surplus, and that would show that we don't respect and appreciate where the surplus has come from. It's really simple, and I feel almost kind of stupid for repeating these things, but the state of Minnesota gets its revenue from income tax and from sales tax. Those two things are very dependent on a good, thriving, growing economy. If the economy is not doing well, we will see reduced income tax receipts and sales tax receipts. So what do we need for Minnesota's budget to do well? We need Minnesotans to do well. So in our public policy, what we need to do is pass policies that will help Minnesotans do well. That will continue to create the surpluses that we want here in the state of Minnesota.
Speaker-designate Hortman has said the legislature will start right away working on unfinished business from last session. She named tax conformity, the opioid epidemic, and nursing home abuse and neglect as some of the issues. Do you think there's common ground to be found there?
Well, I think there are. The legislature on a bipartisan basis passed all three of those things. We ran into a chief executive and our governor that didn't want to accomplish anything last session. He literally, was going to veto anything that we sent to him. In fact, he really refused to engage with us even at the end of session. And that was his decision. He's the chief executive. He can't sign bills that we don't send him, and we can't sign bills into law ourselves. So it takes both sides. We are co-equal branches of government, and unfortunately, in the last, I think, 7 days of session last year, the governor canceled or refused to meet with us probably 6 times in the last 7 days, when normally we'd be meeting for 4 to 6 hours every day. It just wasn't the kind of engagement I think that Minnesotans expect from the governor, and unfortunately those important issues where we found broad bipartisan support in the legislature to pass all of those things, were killed swiftly by the governor's veto pen. And my hope is that our new governor, and I'm certain that he will engage on those issues, and I think we can find common ground and pass them very, very quickly out of the legislature and get them to the governor's desk.
What other issues would your caucus like to focus on this session?
Well, I think we're going to, number one, healthcare costs, they're still too high. Health insurance costs are still too high. Minnesota families are kind of reeling from still the effects of Obamacare. I know that people like to think that Obamacare had some really great things in it, like coverage for pre-existing conditions and kids on your policy until they're 26. And those are great things. But the great news for Minnesotans is that we already had both of those things. In fact, we had pre-existing condition coverage prior to Obamacare here in Minnesota, and we had kids on your parents' policy until they were 25. So was it worth the 300% increase in premiums that Obamacare brought us to get one more year for your kids on their parents' policy? No, it wasn't. And I have talked to so many folks across the state of Minnesota. In fact, I think about one woman who told me about the premiums that her family was facing. It was a family of four, $3,000 a month and a $13,000 deductible. And literally with tears in her eyes, she told me they couldn't afford it and they had to drop their insurance coverage for a family of four. That's what Obamacare has meant to Minnesotans who've struggled to figure out how to pay for their health insurance. And the answer isn't more government involvement in our health care. The answer is to go back to what we had before. We had the highest insured rates. We had some of the lowest and most competitive rates in the country. And we had coverage for pre-existing conditions and kids on their parents' policy until they were 25. We did it here better than anybody else in the country. Let's not continue to import things from D.C. to Minnesota. Let's export our Minnesota ideas to D.C. in hopes that others can do as well as we have done.
And finally, Representative Gene Pawlowski has been pushing for changes to ensure a more open and transparent lawmaking process. As someone who has been both the minority leader and speaker, are there process changes you'd like to see that would be acceptable to the entire House?
You know, there are. I think we can always do better. I have grave concerns about what this new majority is doing first thing out of the chute with their committee structure. They are now making all of their finance committees subcommittees of Ways and Means, which means they don't have to move bills. This is really an inside baseball thing, and most people won't understand it. But the time that Minnesotans won't understand it is when they're trying to track a bill through the process, and they're going to be completely lost. Democrats now, this is a lack of transparency that I think I have never seen in the legislature in my time here. But it means that you could have the same bill being heard in multiple committees on the same day, and they could all be working off different versions of that same bill. In fact, one could amend it in this committee, another could take up the bill unamended in this one and amend it, and trying to mesh that all together. And most of all, we can figure that part out. Most of all, the problem is going to be when the public can't figure out when to come to a hearing, when to make sure their voice is heard in the lawmaking process. Those are the kinds of things that I think this new majority is really stumbling right out of the blocks to get it right. So a lot of lip service has been paid to improving the process when they're actually, I think, degrading the process with some of their first actions. So it'll remain to be seen. But Representative Pawlowski is well respected on both sides of the aisle. He's a scholar of legislative procedure, and he really cares about this institution and process more than anybody I've ever seen. And if he wants to make this place better, he can count me as an ally.
Representative Kurt Daudt, leader of the Republican caucus, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.